What's up, guys? Hope everyone's doing well. This is my discussion board for assessment admission, assignment admission. So today I'm going to be talking about the waist to hip ratio assessment, and I did it for a number of reasons. We've been looking at some more complex and intricate tests that can be done from an exercise physiology basis, but there's a few things that I really like about the waist to hip ratio assessment, and it actually provides us a lot more data than most people think. So we're going to go kind of through some categories, and I will discuss those categories hopefully in sufficient length. Okay, so first of all, what is the waist to hip ratio? It is a very simple equation where we determine a ratio based on the measurement of the waist divided by the measurement of the hips. And I'll explain where those points are and how to take those measurements in a second. But the point is, we get this number that, according to the World Health Organization, a number of experts they consulted with, can tell us a lot about disease risk for stuff like cardiovascular disease, diabetes type 2, stroke, and other events that ultimately lead to premature death. So the waist to hip ratio is very informative. It tells us about the distribution of fat mass, especially in the abdominal region, which again has been associated with a number of morbidities and comorbidities. Okay, so what specifically does it tell us? I kind of summed it up already, but just to go through one more time, cardiovascular disease risk, or at least it has been linked to an increased risk of cardiovascular incidence with the higher numbers, and I'll explain what those numbers break down to be later, but myocardial infarction, aka heart attack, stroke, premature death, risk of diabetes, blood sugar mismanagement, and again, it's because of that visceral tissue, abdominal tissue component. Fatty tissue. So what are the benefits? So why would we use waist to hip ratio? For one, it is super simple to do. It is extremely non-invasive, with the exception of just touching the waist and the buttocks, but you're doing it with a tape. And it's very quick to do. So that's another thing. Instead of drawing this long process out, like some of the tests that we've read in our textbook can take 24 to 48 hours to fully complete. And of course, those have more exhaustive informational benefits. But for the ease of use, the simplicity, the cost, there's the cost associated with a waist to hip ratio analysis is your time. So whatever you charge as a professional, but in terms of the equipment, it's a tape. You can use a seamstress tape, although those have some give to them. So they actually make tapes designed specifically for the waist to hip ratio that give a little bit of a tension. And again, we'll talk about that in a second, but those tapes are designed to be more consistent. They have tension, and some of them actually have readers on them, so spring-loaded readers to tell you exactly how much tension you're applying to the tissue so that you're not overly tightening the band or not tight enough to get a true reading. Okay, and the third thing, or the last thing, not the third thing, the last of several, is the low competency required. And what I mean by that is, instead of having to do this long learning process, in terms of, let's say you were using like a bomb calorimeter or a DEXA scanner or something, there's a learning curve associated with administering those tests. And of course, with a waist to hip ratio, there's a learning curve too, because it has to be done properly. But the learning curve is very low because you're doing two measurements and the equation is very simple. It's an arithmetic equation. Okay, so what are the limitations? So this is important to know. So there's some information that we can't get from a waist to hip ratio. For instance, it doesn't tell us stuff like what a blood work panel could do. We're not going to know if a person's electrolytes are off from a waist to hip ratio. We're not going to know their blood lipid profile, although we could probably guess that it's not going to be as good if we had to take a shot in the dark, right? Depending on where they're at. The bone mass density. So we're not going to get, or bone mineral density. We're not going to get some of those readings that we would get maybe from a DEXA scan or something that's a little more intricate from a body composition measurement perspective. We're not going to get much on the endocrine profile. Certain measurements will get, or certain assessments will give us more data about that. And we won't necessarily get a great indicator of total mass distribution, total fat mass distribution, because, with skin fold measurements, we're getting measurements from various portions of the torso, the lower body, the face. So we're getting a little bit better understanding of how the fat mass is distributed on an individual. So those are some of the limitations to waist to hip ratio. But in my opinion, the benefits far outweigh the negatives for the purpose that it's used for. And I'll talk about that in a second as well. So how do you actually do the measurement? Okay, so the first thing is the client needs to be prepared. And this kind of goes into Our job as exercise professionals, regardless of what field you go into, you are going to be touching the client. So you need to be very professional and respectful when it comes to that. You're still entering somebody's personal space. So the first thing you need to do is let the client know, talk them through the assessment. This is how this assessment's going to work. This is the reason why I'm recommending it. And please let me know if you're ever uncomfortable with any of the methods and we can alter the assessment or do something different. Okay, so that's first and foremost. You have to explain the assessment and let the client know what's happening and also give them a comfort level with what's going on and a decision in the process. You never just dive in and start measuring people. Okay. All right. So first thing is we need the client to be in a relaxed state. So we need them to take several deep breaths before we actually take the measurement. And preferably when you do this, we want it to be fasted and in the morning because we don't want food being present in the intestinal tract or lots of water that's causing bloating or anything like that. Now, the waist measurement is going to be at the top of the iliac crest. Okay, so a lot of people will say that the waist should be at the umbilical fold or the actual navel itself, but that may be underestimating the amount of fat mass in the abdominal region. So at the iliac crest, which is the top of that pelvic ridge that you can actually touch on most people that are lean enough, that's the level on the body that we want to create that waist measurement. Now the hip is going to be the widest portion of the buttocks, and that's part of the reason, especially this measurement, the hip measurement, why you need to talk the client through it first. Okay, and remember, keep it professional, as little contact as possible, as little time in their personal space as possible. All right, now according to the World Health Organization, we want about 100 grams of tension, and most people are like, well, how the heck do I do 3 1/3 ounces of tension? They have tapes, like I said before, that have spring-loaded measurements that tell you how much tension is being applied to the spring. So you can use one of those, but if you didn't have that, like let's say you had to do an off the cuff, all you had was a seamstress tape, you would just use enough tension to create tension around the person's body, but not create any type of over drooping of the tissue on the tape. So you don't want it so tight that you're seeing the tissue puff or get manipulated in any way. Okay, now, and the final thing before you finish the measurements is when you do these measurements, I would recommend that you do 3 measurements at each location and take the average of the 3. So let's say you're doing the waist measurement and you get, say, 32 inches the first time, then you get 33 inches the second time, you get 34 inches the third time. The average between the 3 is that 33 inches. So that's the number we're going to go with. That's going to make it as precise as possible. And of course, the more number of times you do it, the more precise the averages get. But again, we're also wanting to preserve the dignity and the comfort level of the client or patient. Okay. Now, who can use this measurement? Doctors can use this. Certified personal trainers can use this. Nutritionists, dietitians, anybody who is involved in the health support process for a client and or patient is going to be able to use this assessment because of all of the reasons aforementioned. It's easy to use, it's simple to learn, it's mostly low invasive. We're not doing a muscle biopsy or stabbing anybody or intubating. We're not doing anything crazy like that. We're not applying a mask. It's very low invasion. So most professionals that work with people are going to benefit from this. And to kind of go back, why would a doc want to do this versus a PT or something? And I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but the World Health Organization showed through their conglomeration of information that the waist to hip ratio actually shows us certain risk factors that the BMI alone does not. So there are separate bits of information, collections and pools of information that we can draw from this assessment that other assessments don't necessarily provide us because of different associations with the measurements. Okay. Now, finally, what do the numbers mean, right? So like, okay, we take the waist to hip ratio. Now what? Like, what does it mean for the client? What does it mean for you as the practitioner? Well, first of all, because the waist measurement itself is associated with risk factors at certain measurements, we need to know what those cutoffs are. Okay, so for men, a waist measurement of 94 centimeters or above, which is approximately 37 inches or above, is considered to be at an increased risk above baseline for things like cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes, etc. And if that measurement gets above 102 centimeters, which is about 40 inches, we're really at a substantially increased risk. So these numbers help us to say, okay, so-and-so, these numbers are at this particular risk factor. And that also helps us to set goals, right? We're at 40 inches right now. We want to shoot to get under 37. So we have a better overall long-term risk factor for some of these things. For women, 80 centimeters at the waist is that increased risk, or 31.5 inches. 88 centimeters or 34.5 inches is a substantially increased risk, according to the World Health Organization. So again, you've got these kind of monumental cutoff points that help us to know where a person is at in their health journey and their body composition journey. And I should also say that before I wrap this up, is what's beautiful about this is that with just another step, you can take some of this data that you've collected, you can plug it into other equations that help us to determine body fat percentage. So like the Navy formula is used for body fat percentage and or calorie requirements. There's a number of different things that you can plug this data into to give you more data, to yield more information. It's not perfect, but it's a good thing to go off of, okay? Now, waist to hip ratio wise, with men, we want to see it less than 0.9. So if you divide that waist measurement by that hip measurement underneath, the yield should be less than 0.9. If it's above 0.9, if it's at 0.9 or above, there is an increase, a marked increased risk for cardiovascular instances, diabetes 2, premature death ad infinitum. And for ladies, it's equal to or greater than 0.85 centimeters is that point of substantially increased risk. So our goal as, let's say you're a strength coach or a personal trainer or a nutritionist, we're trying to guide the client in those healthy methods, those healthy lifestyle approaches, those choice processes. We're coaching them to get beneath those points, because if we can do that, we see that their disease risk factors are reduced. Okay. Anyways, guys, I'm wrapping up here at the 12-minute mark. I hope that wasn't overly long. I hope this was helpful for you guys. I'd love to see your feedback as my classmates. And of course, Professor, I'm very interested in your feedback. And with that, hope you guys are having an awesome week. Good luck with the rest of the course, and we will talk soon.